Hey everyone, welcome back to the Tune Project. So I've talked quite a bit about double stops here on the Tune Project, but today I thought I would address a very common problem and concern that many people have, and that is how to avoid accidentally hitting your left hand fingers on other strings as you're playing double stops. So that's what we're going to dive into today. If you enjoy this video, go ahead and give it a thumbs up below, and if you'd like to see more from the Tune Project, consider hitting that red subscribe button below along with the notification bell so that you can see when I upload a new video. So we all know there's nothing worse than playing a beautiful double stop and anticipating that it'll sound wonderful, and then all of a sudden you place a finger down and you hear this awful squeaking sound. And this is caused by your finger accidentally hitting that open string that you're trying to play as a double stop. So we're gonna fix that today. So let's first talk about hitting the lower string accidentally, because that's a little bit of an easier problem to fix and one that is a little bit more visible. So what that really comes down to is if, let's say, you're playing melody on the A string, and you want to add in the D string as a double stop, but your fingers keep accidentally hitting the D string, right, and causing that terrible sound, that's where you want to make sure that you have enough space in between your finger and the lower string, okay? So this really comes down to keeping an eye on your finger and the space between that finger and the open string so that you don't get caught on the other string and cause unnecessary sounds and dampen the vibrations of the other strings. So the best way to practice this is simply by just playing a scale. Now you can pick your string. I would recommend starting on A, so that's what we're gonna do today. But I want you to just start by playing a simple scale. So we're just gonna play A, B, C sharp, D. All right, easy enough, just on the A string. Now we're gonna add in the D string. So this is where I want you to really keep a close eye on your fingers and making sure that they're not getting too close to the D string. We want that little bit of space in between. So let's try that same scale, but this time with the D string. Okay, so if you find that you're still having trouble and your fingers are still running into that string, I would maybe check the position of your hand to make sure that you're not leaning too far in the direction of the lower strings so that you are giving yourself enough space. So make sure that you are doing this with your elbow and not your wrist. We don't want any of this motion happening here. We want to keep everything within our wrist and our arm in a nice straight line. So make sure that you're keeping that consistent and simply adjusting your elbow to either bring your hand back or forward as needed. All right, so that's if you're having issues with running into a lower string. Now let's talk about the slightly more complicated issue of the higher string, which is actually quite a bit more common of an issue. So the same thing that we talked about with the lower string actually applies here with the higher string, where we just want to create a little bit more space. But the problem is with the higher string, and what makes it more complicated is that it's harder for us to see that space in between our finger and the higher string. We kind of have to work a little bit harder to be able to make that gap happen and to be able to see it. So what I would recommend first doing is just placing your first finger on B on the A string and just taking a look at how close the flesh of your finger is to the E string, and that'll be a good indicator of how your double stops will sound and if your finger is too close to the E string or if there's a chance that it might run into it accidentally as you're playing double stops. So firstly and most importantly, we want to make sure that we have good technique, right? So again, like I talked about earlier, we want to make sure that our wrist is in alignment with our arm and our hand and that our fingers are nicely curved over the strings. We don't want any flat fingers on the string because that'll just make the issue much worse. So we want to make sure everything is curved and our fingers are able to stand up nice and tall. So when you set that first finger on B, it should be nice and rounded so that you are automatically giving yourself a little bit more room around the other strings. So if all of that is done, if your left hand technique is great, if your left arm is great, but you still find that there's not enough space in between your finger and the E string, or no space at all perhaps, that's where again you would want to look to the elbow and make sure that your elbow is doing its job properly. So for the lower string and avoiding running into it, like we talked about earlier, I mentioned how you can bring your elbow back slightly behind the instrument so that your hand and your fingers are leaning backward to give yourself more room. So you can probably guess that the opposite is true when we're talking about the higher string. In this case, you'd want to make sure that your elbow is forward, because that totally changes the angle in which your finger is placed on the string, and it allows for much more room in between your finger and the string, which is what we want. So once you have placed that first finger and you know exactly where it is and you've adjusted your elbow and you've made sure that your technique is great, now we can go ahead and do the test, and that is to just play the A string and E string together. So we still have our first finger on B, and we're just gonna play that note along with open E. All right, so hopefully already it is resolved just by those few things that we talked about. But if not, if you find that you're still running into the higher string, again, look to your elbow and see if you can pull that elbow forward anymore without causing any strain in your back or in your shoulder, but just enough to where you open up a little bit more space in between your finger and the E string, because that's really what we want, and that's really the best way to, again, just open up that space and avoid hitting the E string unnecessarily. And now we can play that same scale that we did earlier, but this time between the A string and the E string. So we're gonna do that together now, and just take a look at each of your fingers and make sure that your elbow is forward so that we have plenty of room in between the finger and the E string. Here we go. All right, so at that point, you were probably able to tell if you were in the clear and you resolved the issue just from those few things that we talked about. But if you find that maybe you're good with some fingers, for example, your first finger is great, but maybe your third finger was running into the E string, that's where you would want to, again, just take a look at the angle, make sure that you're keeping that elbow forward, that everything is lined up nicely, your wrist isn't collapsed or anything, because that can really cause the fingers to be pulled back into the higher strings, which is not what we want. So we want to make sure that we're getting everything pulled up nice and tall to create as much space as possible. Everything is nice and open within the hand and the fingers. So make sure that that is the case for you with all of your fingers. And then once you feel that you've done that, then you can go back and play the scale again with the E string and A string together. And hopefully by that point, it'll have been resolved. Well, I hope this video was helpful for you, and hopefully you no longer have the issue of running into other strings accidentally when playing double stops. Thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Happy practicing. If you've made it this far, you must have enjoyed the video, so why not check out this one next? Also, if you'd like exclusive content from the Tune Project and a more personalized experience, head over to Patreon and join our wonderful little fiddle community. Your support helps me to continue to grow as a creator and ensures that I'm able to continue to provide free educational content here on YouTube. Thank you!